Hello and welcome to another Archaeo-Scope. This series is kind of like an inverted questions of doom, where rather than you sending me questions about the past, we turn an archaeological or historical perspective on current issues and attempt together to come up with new answers and maybe even new questions based on those answers about the topic in question. In other words, I'm sort of sending new questions to have a think about. And I'm very interested in seeing what we come up with through talking about them. Today's Archaeoscope is inspired by a conversation I had yesterday, very briefly, with someone during a workshop I was delivering at Newcastle Cathedral Church, or St Nicholas's Cathedral. It's a wonderful space to deliver a workshop, very nice acoustics, very echoey, booming voice was possible. And I was delivering a workshop about the Lindisfarne Gospels. We were talking about the importance of that document, the context in which they were made, how, why, by whom, when. And the introduction to the workshop revolves around the beginnings of the Saxon kingdoms in what is now England. So we show certainly the Roman military influence retreating from Britain, and then the immigration of Saxons, Angles and Jutes, and that being the world which brings forth the Lindisfarne Gospels. And at this point, someone put up their hand and said, "Excuse me." Yes, yes. "I am an Angle," they said. And I said, "Ooh, how acute." I didn't really. I wish I had though. No, actually what I said was, wonderful, great. So part of your family has possibly this sort of heritage. Great, this is right up your street then. Hopefully you'll enjoy this workshop. And we went on from there. We had a wonderful time, very enjoyable. But it sort of chimes with something which I keep on coming back to as a thinking archaeologist, and that is our relationship to the past. Whether or not current identities and current concepts of who we are actually pan out into the deep past, or indeed into the recent past, into history as opposed to prehistory, or whether or not our relationship to our identity is different from our relationship to our actual human past. And indeed, whether or not it's possible for people, myself included, to truly comprehend our human past as opposed to the social or familial legacy which we believe we've inherited. Now, I thought about ways that I could possibly tackle this issue, and I thought that the best way is actually to do it with numbers. So I came up with a bit of a sheet here that we can have a look at to maybe explore this issue. So the sheet begins thus: mathematical exercise demonstrating estimated numbers of ancestors for one person stemming from one parent. It's a table, and the columns are labelled at the top: generation number, title, so that's how we refer to that generation, the total number of people in that generation, the date of birth approximately of that generation, and also the world population estimated during their lifetime. So, generation 1, with ego, or you, being 0, is your parents, or in this instance, a parent, because we are branching off immediately to one side of the family tree. There is one parent with an estimated or an approximate date of birth of 1960, and an estimated world population of 7 billion. The world population figures, incidentally, are estimated according to UN figures stemming back into the past. So, as we start to move down this list, the numbers begin to change. By the time we get to the 6th generation, our great-great-great-great-grandparents, we have 32 of those, born around about 1810, with a world population estimated at being about 1 billion people. As we move further down the list, generation 8, that's 6 great-great-great-great-great-great-grandparents, we have 128 of those, born around about 1750, with the world population estimated at around about 791 million people. Further down the list, generation 16, we have 14 greats. So that's 14 greats, great times 14, grandparents, and we have 32,768 of those. Estimated to have been born around 1510 to the beginning of the 16th century, and a world population estimated at about 500 million people, so 500 million. Further down the list, generation 26, 24 greats, that is, so great times 24, grandparents, we have 33 million, 554,432 of those. Born around 1210, the beginning of the 13th century AD, with a world population of around 450 million people. And right down the bottom of that list, I chose to end the list at 40 greats, that's the 42nd generation. So great, great, great times 40. We have 2,199,023,255,552 individuals, or certainly connections. The date of birth for those individuals is around about 730 AD, so the beginning of the 8th century, with the world population estimated at around 207 million people. Now remember, these ancestor totals actually double up when both of your parents are factored in. This is just one parent and the ancestors that you have through that one parent. Truly mind-boggling. Now it's worthwhile touching on some issues to do with these numbers. First of all, the date of birth estimates. I've gone with 30-year generations, and you may think, well, actually, didn't life expectancy change through time? It did. But when you look at, for example, people who trace their line back or their lineage back to William the Conqueror, they do that in around about 30 generations. And if you look back at the sheet here, around about 1030 to 1090 is generations 30, 31 and 32. So actually these approximate dates of birth work out quite well in terms of the generational values of them. Secondly, it's worthwhile saying actually that William the Conqueror actually highlights my point and the central question that I'm asking. And that is, why do we trace our lineage in a line? The people who talk about William the Conqueror being related to William the Conqueror, and I have no doubt that they are choosing one person out of, if you go back to the list here, 1060 and 1030-ish AD birth dates, one person out of 1 or 2 billion ancestors or people, potential ancestors. And if you double that up, that's 2 or 4 billion ancestors if you have both your parents involved there. So we choose, people in that instance are choosing one individual to trace their family back to out of a potential 4 billion individuals. There's also another issue here as well, and that is the numbers indicate something rather staggering. If we go back to the sheet, you can see in generation 42, with 40 greats, you do have on one side of your family 2,199,023,255,552 individuals, but a world population of only 207 million. What this means is that actually people are doubling, tripling, quadrupling up their roles in your family tree. Another way of putting that is to say we are very much interrelated. Humanity is, inbred, that's the best way I can put it. Endogamous, or endogamy. The fact that we marry back into our own families, our own groups, every 7 generations it's estimated, really is the reason why these numbers are so huge, even though world population doesn't match them. It means that actually we're all very, very closely related, very closely connected to each other, much more closely than many people would like to think. A bit disturbing, isn't it? But the question is, why is this so hard to conceive? Why do we choose to go back in a line rather than thinking about this vast, truly massive family tree that we belong to? And I've only gone back 1300 years. If you go back further, back to, for example, the Iron Age in Britain, the numbers become much more staggering, and the world population certainly doesn't match those numbers. So again, you become more and more complicatedly related to people around you. Well, I do understand. My idea, for example, about the 8th century, about maybe a Saxon ancestor, I find it much easier to conceive of them as being someone who looks a little bit like me, living in the past, and from that person comes me, eventually. 40 generations later, here I am. But, and even though I know that's not the case, it's just easier to think that way. This may also be actually linked with 2 other things. First of all, inheritance issues. We inherit things via a line, usually connected with a name. So we inherit our identity, we inherit property, money, social status via a line. And this is usually, certainly in our society, via a paternal or father line linked with a surname. So maybe that's why we think in terms of lines. But I suspect the other reason is just that the numbers are simply too massive to comprehend. I can't even comprehend 2 trillion people. What does that even mean? Or 2 trillion connections? It's truly complicated and vast and massive. And if you subscribe to Dunbar's number, the idea that somehow, or rather not that somehow, so that people can only really manage in their minds 130 social connections at one time, which actually also is the average number of friends people have on Facebook. Perhaps that's the reason why we don't think in this massive family tree. We simply can't do it. People, human beings, are not programmed, or not, our minds don't work that way. We can't think about trillions of ancestors. We can only really think about 130 people at a time. Even though all of this is demonstrably not true. This lineage, this line thinking, the idea that you have essentially 2 or 4 people back in time who've just been resulting eventually in you. Not only is that incredibly disturbing, the idea that they're just intermarry forever, but also as well, the mathematics, as we just had a look, the rate at which numbers add up, it shows that that's just not the case. Also, as well, it's worthwhile considering that these generations work both ways. So not only are the numbers getting bigger as the generations go up, but those people didn't just have one child, probably. They probably had lots of different children. So the numbers actually multiplied downwards as well, which means that these family trees didn't just result in you. These people resulted in billions of other people, hence 7 billion people on the planet today. Now, this is very much a challenge to your identity. I know it is. And the reason why I'm bringing it up is just because I think it's one of the most important things that archaeology has to offer the world today, and that is a clarity of perspective on who we are and how we came to be here today. National identity, racism, economic protectionism, national boundaries, all of these things are relatively recent. And actually I stopped at around about 1300 years ago, because that's when, certainly in Britain, you start to get concepts of kingdoms, which eventually become the concept of England, as it were. So it's the beginning, arguably, of English national identity. Not necessarily British national identity, but certainly English national identity. These are challenging concepts. The idea that back then you could have 4 trillion connections, that you are related to people who aren't just from a kingdom or from a nation state, is a very challenging concept to many people today. It's very emotive. I do understand that. But one of the reasons why I wanted to bring it up is that I also think it should be inspirational. We are part of a brotherhood, a sisterhood, a siblinghood of humanity. We are a wonderfully connected species, and in that I think there's something worth celebrating. So I bring it back, I suppose, back to that question: why do we think in straight lines? Why do people talk about, well, my family line is German, or my family line is Celtic, or my family line is Mexican, when demonstrably, actually, before you know it, you're related to many other people from many other places. I've used this example before, but I'll briefly mention Mrs. Soup, for example. She is Northern Irish, a very proud Northern Irish woman. One generation back, her parents, one parent is from the Republic of Ireland, the other parent is from the Northern Ireland, from the north. Back another generation, things start to get a bit more complicated. Obviously, they have 2 parents each, so that's 4 people linked with Mrs. Soup. Back a few more generations, we have many more people linked with Mrs. Soup from many more different places, including Germany. So her line is not a line at all. Her identity, her Northern Irish identity, while Northern Irish, she's definitely Northern Irish, comes from a complicated soup, a web, a beautiful tree, which has resulted in the woman who I married. The same goes for me. You know, I'm a proud Welshman, but my surname is actually, it comes from some old English words. So there's a hint there that I'm possibly not Welsh forever backwards. And I think this is not only a challenge which a thinking historian and archaeologist should present to themselves, but also one which I think is worthwhile presenting to society. Not to tear down national identities, but rather just to add some clarity and maybe challenge those more ugly elements of that kind of thinking. Essentially, the idea of genetic purity or national purity being a fallacy, being a created idea, a humanly created idea. Humanly created? You know, created by people. Anyway, why straight lines? Why do we have such a problem with these issues? I'll now open up the floor to you. Please do feel free to comment below. Have a bit of a chat about this. Do have a think. If you do have an extreme point of view, i.e. if you do believe in certain not particularly pleasant perspectives on the past, please don't share your points of view on this video. I don't want to hear, for example, about extreme views linked with, say, Aryanism. But I do want to hear why do you think we struggle with these ideas and how we can possibly maybe even change our perspective on the past. There you go. Please do comment below. I have a great time, incidentally, discussing this, and well, take care. Until next time, bye-bye.